My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
And my name is Pixel Patch. I'm a joyful geek with an expertise in gaming, both tabletop and video.
Our mission is to bring nerd culture to the masses.
And by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, TV, mega comic books, or is that graphic novels, cartoons, oops, that's animation, Disney, Star Wars, Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and Digimon, and Mighty Morphin, Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Nintendo, Cinematic Universes, Marvel, DC, Justice League, is Batman, Leagues with Superman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Avengers, Iron Man, Captain Jack, Loki, Spider-Man, and Hulk and Logan, X-Men, Battlers, Alien, Galaxy, Guardians, Star Trek, Prick, Prick, Card, and Janeway, Nerds and Geeks from gather around and join them in the Big Bad Jar, Average Joe and Pixel Patch, they peek under the microscope.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd culture under the microscope.
That is my attempt at sounding like Optimus Prime. It doesn't work all that well.
I see.
Yeah. Pixel Patch is not with us this week. He's been working at the Ottawa Geek Market this weekend, and well, he was up to his elbows in his forehead with geeks. Last week it was kids because of the March break. This week he was busy with geeks, so he's not with us tonight. But I have a guest with me who is new to the show, so it's the first time we've had a new guest in a while. He's my current roommate, but for this conversation he'll be referred to as Professor F. So we welcome Professor F to the Bat Jar Podcast today.
Thanks, Average Joe. It's great to be on here and fulfilling the role somewhat of Asian John, in a sense, for the first time since living here, since as your listeners I'm sure know that your previous roommate was the co-host.
I guess you've technically been part of many episodes because you tend to just kind of walk into the room or when Pixel and I are recording. So
that's true. If ever you hear like a tap or something in the background or feet or some sort of random noise that's not part of them, chances are it's me. It could be Pixel Patch's fiance, but chances are it's me.
Yeah. So, but you do a pretty good job. Like, listeners, you can probably tell us if you hear Professor F during the shows because you're pretty quiet. Like, it's very rare that we ever hear you. If you've ever listened to our podcast, you know that whenever we have a guest on for the first time, we ask them a couple of questions just so our audience can get to know them.
Right.
So I hope you're ready for this.
I forgot about that part and I didn't prepare.
Okay. Well, good. So, what kind of nerd or geek would you call yourself?
Do I get some options? Can it be multiple choice?
No multiple choice here. Yeah, so for your sake and for the sake of our audience, for those who haven't been around very long, we did a whole episode basically describing the differences between nerds and geeks. So a nerd is somebody who enjoys more solitary interests. They're typically more academically minded. They would be interested in something that is more Star Trek than Star Wars. Whereas a geek is typically someone who is into more social activities, kind of Dungeons and Dragons, collectibles, and more Star Wars-y kind of things. Mm-hmm. So with those, I mean, there's so much more to say, but with that limited amount of information, would what kind of nerd or geek interest do you have?
Yeah, well, in terms of the distinction, I don't know if, like between a geek and a nerd, I don't know if that really helps too much. I've often put myself kind of in the middle between introvert, extrovert, so I think there's a mix of nerd and geek in that sense. But I'm going to say that whether I'm a geek or a nerd, I think I tend more towards the nerd side when it comes to things like science and tech. I really like reading articles about astronomy, like the latest space technology developments or discoveries in astronomy. I would share with a few friends who I know have an interest in that, but for the most part, I'm happy to read about that stuff myself. Similarly with sci-fi, I don't really feel a need to share my interest with others too much. But with music, perhaps, I might be more of a geek. That's more of a group activity for me, being in a band or sharing about my latest find in terms of other bands that I've liked or going to see bands live. So maybe a music geek and a science and sci-fi nerd.
Okay, interesting. That's an interesting combination. Now, what kind of nerd or geek do you want to be? And the point behind this question is to emphasize if there's things you'd like to get interested in that you haven't gotten interested in yet, or if there's certain fields of interest that you want to spend more time in than you can right now.
Never thought about that. I'd say I'm pretty happy with the level I'm at. I think if I was to spend more time, it would just be in those interests that I have already, just going deeper into those. But I feel like I've got a pretty good sense of what's out there that interests me. So it'd just be going deeper into some of those sci-fi shows that I've watched, but maybe not all the episodes, or finding out more about astronomy, that sort of thing.
Sounds astronomical. Someone's got to make the puns here without Pixel here to do that. So, well, we're happy to have here Professor F, and as we go through this week's content, I'm sure our listeners will get to know more about you. So, hope you're ready.
Ready as I can be.
We're going to talk about the news first, and as always, I give the person who is not me a choice between one of three options.
Okay.
So here are your options this week. We can talk about how a new Zelda game is coming out for the Nintendo Switch, but there's a catch. It's developed by an independent company and not Nintendo.
Oh.
So that's one story. The second, we can talk about the first set of reviews are in for the new Shazam movie. So we can talk about what the critics are saying about that. This is just over 2 weeks away from the release of the film. Or we can talk about the trailer for the live-action Dora the Explorer movie that came out this weekend.
Oh, man. I can't believe they're actually making a real Dora the Explorer movie. Like live action, that is. I just automatically think to the College Humor Dora the Explorer. I think that one would have been much better, personally. I'm going to say let's go with option B. A lot of my friends growing up played Zelda, and maybe even the original Zelda for NES. And I think that is interesting that it's not made by Nintendo, seeing as it's such a trademark Nintendo franchise. But I never really got into Zelda at all. I would like to see the new Shazam movie, though, so I'm interested to hear what's been said about it.
All right. Well, so you've heard that the Shazam movie is happening.
I have, yeah. I've seen some of the trailers, or I think maybe is there just the one trailer? It looks entertaining.
I think there's a trailer and a TV spot. Like, they haven't released too much footage of the movie, which I think I'm thankful for.
Yeah.
They did an interesting thing this past weekend. They did a preview screening for I think it's people who are either Amazon Prime subscribers in the States or Fandango ticket account holders. They did the same thing for Aquaman, and
so anyone with an account.
Yeah, could go. And here in Canada, I don't know why, like Cineplex basically just had screenings people could go to.
Okay.
A special preview night, like 2 weeks out from the release of the movie. So I'm guessing it's a way to build positive word of mouth for the movie. Mm-hmm. You can imagine if a movie's bad and they do that kind of a preview for it, it would just tell people, don't watch it, don't go see it. But they did these previews, and they also...
So they must be pretty confident about it then.
Yeah, and the other thing that's kind of interesting is that they're releasing the critic reviews now, 2 weeks after the movie's release.
And they wouldn't do that if it was being received poorly either.
Yeah, there's some movies that you can pretty much tell they're going to be bad because the embargo on critic reviews comes out either the Wednesday before the movie's released or the day of.
Are they even allowed to do that?
Yeah, so the studios can decide when the press are allowed to release their reviews.
Huh.
And now they have it staggered, so you can do social media impressions before reviews. So it seems that generally, if the movie is a bigger movie, they start screening for either for fans or for the press a month before the official release. So people who see the movie at those screenings are allowed to post on social media their reaction to the movie without reviewing it, if that makes any sense.
Right.
And so we've reached the point where they are actually letting people review the movie even though it's not coming out for 2 weeks, which is probably a good sign the studio is confident in it.
Yeah.
In fact, Rotten Tomatoes has already announced their tomato meter score.
Okay.
Now, do you remember what the tomato meter is?
Is that just not the review, the overall rating given by either the critics or the audience?
Good guess. The tomato meter is basically the aggregate of the critic reviews.
Okay.
So there's a different percentage that shows up on the movies page for audience
Okay.
score. And I don't know the math behind it because like every critic kind of has their own rating system. So they basically figure out, okay, what's the average percentage-wise, whether
Right.
you're rating out of 5 stars
Right.
or
Yeah, just
4 bad cookies or,
just take the percentage of each and then add them together.
Yeah, so when the official score was first announced for Shazam, there were only about 30 critics that had reviewed the movie, and I guess that's enough for them to announce an average. Do you want to take a guess at what the percentage was?
For Shazam?
Yeah.
Well, if they're confident about it, I'm going to say, I think 75%, like respectable.
So when the tomato meter was first announced, Shazam had a score of 97%.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
Since then, it's gone up to a total of 46 reviews, and the
Okay.
scores dipped down to 93%.
Still very good.
So I mean, this seems to be the case with all these movies. Like the initial smaller audience of critics are ones that would be more favorable, I suppose, towards the movie.
Yeah.
So as time goes on and more critics review the movie, the percentages will most likely, if anything, just go lower.
Right. Yeah.
It seems that on average there's at least 220 critics that review movies for Rotten Tomatoes.
Okay.
Well, they don't review the movies for Rotten Tomatoes. They review it for whatever newspaper or media site they work for. But there's at least 220 critic reviews that get factored into the tomato meter. So, I mean, there's still a while, I guess you could say, before we get the final critic review.
Mhm.
But hearing that it's sitting at 93%
Yeah,
right now,
that's promising.
what does that tell you? Are you the kind of person who really makes your movie viewing decisions based on the critic responses?
It's a factor, but I wouldn't say it's the largest factor. To be honest, I'm looking more at is this a movie that I'm going to find worthwhile, I suppose you could say, just in terms of the content. Like, is it entertaining but in a clean, wholesome way that's not going to leave me with a bad taste in my mouth? Is it a plot line, without getting too much into it and like spoiling it for myself? Is it a plot line that I'm going to find interesting or exciting or entertaining? If the critics give it a really bad review, then I might look into why, but I tend to go more with the audience score. I think a lot of the movies, for example, that win at the Oscars, for example, Best Picture or whatever, I don't find, if they're general crowd pleasers or audience pleasers, then I'll get behind that perhaps. But a lot of the ones that are the critics' favorites, I find they're a little just too out there for me.
Yeah, you didn't like The Shape of Water, and that one.
No, not at all.
That one won. I think that won Best Picture of the year it was released.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
interesting. I just checked Rotten Tomatoes. So even though the article I was reading from said that it had dipped down to 93%, with 46 reviews, it's now sitting at 56 reviews, and it's gone back up to 95%.
Wow.
So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the percentage won't just gradually go down. Maybe it'll actually like stay in the mid 90s like that. Like
Spider-Verse did, right?
Yes, just like Spider-Verse. That's a good example. This makes me very excited because obviously I'm a DC person. I mean, I like Marvel too, but you know, the DC stuff's certainly closer to my heart.
Right. That was going to be my question. I was pretty sure this was DC, but now is this related to the DCU universe?
It's ancillary. Like, I don't think there'll be any direct crossover.
He's not going to be in Justice League.
No. I think it's certainly, I think it's set up to be in that continuity. Like in one of the trailers, you see a Batarang that's like the same style as the ones from the Ben Affleck Batman movies. But I think its connection to those will be minimal at best. Like even Aquaman, really, outside of the fact that Aquaman himself was in Justice League and they make one reference to the villain, there really aren't any like Easter eggs or connections to the Justice League movie.
Yeah.
So they're really trying to rebuild, and this is certainly the first film they're releasing that has a kind of, I would say, almost entirely comedic take. So it'll be, and people have praised the Marvel movies for doing that, right? For taking such a comedic take with the movies. So I'm curious to see like how this will turn out. I just want the movie to do well. I want more people to be excited about DC properties because it's been really hard for me the last couple of years. That basically because of the because of movies like Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman and Justice League, that people
Yeah.
have basically become to negatively associate
Yeah.
the words DC with like bad and the things that they want to be away from.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're one of those people or not, but I won't judge you if you are.
I liked some of them. I did think they didn't really hold up to the Marvel universe that's been created lately. I enjoyed Justice League. It didn't do the same for me entertainment-wise that the Avengers series has done, but it was an okay movie. And I'm willing to give DC a chance. It hasn't permanently tarnished
Scarred
the
you.
reputation for me.
Well, that's good. And hopefully Shazam will be the movie that turns around. Aquaman was certainly a push in the right direction for a lot of people.
Yeah, I'd still have to see that one.
There's still people who have negative things to say about Aquaman, so obviously it's not a perfect film either. But really, like, DC hasn't had a big success since Wonder Woman came out 2 years ago. So
Yeah.
this would be a great win for them if Shazam does end up being really well received and not just makes money, but does well with the audiences. So
Yeah.
I'm very excited that the tomato meter is sitting at 95% right now. Maybe by the time this episode goes out, it'll have gone down again.
So does the tomato meter include any snippets from what those critics have said?
Yep. So like, if you scroll down a Rotten Tomatoes page, it basically it gives you like snippets from their articles.
So what were some highlights for you?
Well, like they always each movie on Rotten Tomatoes has a critic consensus. So they
Okay.
basically they read through what all the people are saying, and then they kind of summarize it in like a couple sentences.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what the critic consensus is for Shazam right now.
Okay.
An effortlessly entertaining blend of humor and heart, Shazam is a superhero movie that never forgets the genre's real power, joyous wish fulfillment.
Overall, I'm not sure what the best comparison would be in the Marvel universe, but just that part about the blend of heart and humor makes me think very much of Ant-Man, that series.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's a good. I guess Thor Ragnarok is kind of that as well.
A little bit.
Because
Yeah.
that one, it's certainly more comedy than the other Thor movies.
Right. I'm just thinking where there's a kid involved. I don't know his role. I guess he's the best friend of Shazam, who is also a kid.
Yes, that's right.
Just where there's kids involved, I'm thinking more of Ant-Man, where there was the daughter's presence played a big part.
That's a good point. Yeah, you've alluded to the fact that children, like child characters, haven't had much of a presence in the MCU thus far, and same thing would go for the DC movies,
Right.
actually.
Yeah.
Really, because
I don't think you even hardly see a child in any of the Batman movies.
Well, you always see child Bruce Wayne.
Okay, that doesn't count.
Anyway, so Shazam comes out in 2 weeks. It's currently sitting at 95%. What do you guys think? I'm talking to you who are listening to this. Are you the type of person that makes your decisions based on the critics? If so, it's at 95%, so buy your tickets now. They're probably available. Go see this movie. I want more people to like DC. Any final words to the Shazam crowd?
No, that I think does it for me.
Well, this is another episode where we're going to get into a topic that proves the thing I say all the time true. And that is, if you email us with a topic for an episode, it will go into the bat jar and it will eventually get pulled out for conversation.
I still need to email you with my suggestions. I've been saying that for months, as you know, but one of these days.
Well, you know the address, and
Yeah.
I'm encouraging people, just add Batjar as a contact in your phone and put our email address in there. You know what? Even if you message us on Facebook or Twitter, like we'll accept any form of, carrier pigeon. We accept all forms of communication. Just don't say it to me directly in person. You have to actually do some kind of communication that is not verbal. That's the one rule. But anyway, all I have to say, we are talking about the Transformers Rescue Bots series today. Now, Professor F, before I asked you to come on the show, had you
Right.
ever heard of Transformers Rescue Bots before?
Yes and no. No, if you'd asked me 2 or 3 weeks ago, but since I live with you, yes, since I've seen you watching a few episodes, and in fact, I made a point of watching a few of those episodes with you tonight. So yes, I have heard of Rescue Bots.
Okay, but let's say you were never living with me, would you have heard of this show?
Definitely not.
Okay. Well, let's open this up a bit more. So the Transformers franchise in general, I'm assuming you've been exposed to it before.
Oh yes.
Would
definitely.
you consider yourself a fan?
Not a huge fan of the cartoon in the 80s. I don't know if it just wasn't on the stations we had. We didn't have cable growing up. Or if I just found other shows to watch. I do remember when I believe McDonald's had Transformers toys, and I thought those were very cool.
Gee, Ronald, my new car turns into a robot.
Great, let's see. Wow, Grimace, did you know I can turn into a McDonald's?
Let me see.
Okay, I'm turning into a McDonald's.
Me too.
When you buy McDonald's Happy Meal, you can become the Master Changer, because you'll get a food toy that changes into an amazing robot. 8 different toys, 2 each week. You can collect and change all 8 new food changeables at McDonald's.
I wanted
Would that
to
have been your
collect
first
those.
exposure to the Transformers universe?
Possibly. Yeah, I don't remember watching a lot of the episodes. I don't have a strong recollection of them. It was more that I thought the toys were cool collectibles. I really liked anything that flew, so all the Decepticon fighter jets and whatnot I thought were very cool. But later on, I just came to know the show kind of secondhand, or saw enough commercials or whatever. But my biggest constant or direct exposure, unfortunately, has been the movies, which I am quite vocal about that I'm not a fan, unfortunately.
Now you're not a fan of them, not because they misrepresent the franchise, but because
No.
of just the way they're presented.
I just think they're bad movies.
Okay. See, I dislike them for a different reason, because I don't feel like they represent the brand very well.
Fair enough.
But I would agree that there's technical errors. We've gone on the record many times in this podcast talking about the misgivings of the live-action Transformers films. But just so I'm understanding you correctly, outside of the toys at McDonald's, your first real exposure to anything Transformers was the live-action films.
My largest exposure was the live-action films. I'm sure I definitely knew of the cartoon growing up. I just don't think I watched a lot of it.
Well, I had an interesting exposure to Transformers because I grew up in the 90s, and during the 90s there was a show called Beast Wars, which was a Transformers series, but I say everyone, the good guys and the bad guys turn into animals instead of vehicles.
Yeah, I think I'm vaguely aware of that show as well, although I don't know if I knew that was Transformers. I don't think I watched it. My younger siblings didn't watch that one.
Beast Wars! Beast Wars!
Yeah, so that was my first exposure, and I had a lot of the toys that were still.
Okay.
And I mean, Transformers is the perfect toy franchise because basically all the characters are toys,
Yeah.
and the fact that they transform, it allows you to kind of like figure out the mechanics of how they actually change because you see it
Yeah.
happen in front of you on the show.
Yeah.
So you're like, and of course, by the time Beast Wars came along, it was computer animation, so like they move so fast that you
Yeah.
can't actually see the transformation. So you have to actually like. And it gives the Hasbro toy makers more ability to actually like just figure out the mechanics of how they're supposed to turn these, creatures from one mode to another. So I grew up watching that show. Its sequel series, Beast Machines, and there were a couple. Then I got into Transformers proper shows. So there was one called Transformers Robots in Disguise. Then there was a trilogy of shows that were these Transformers shows were actually animes that were made in Japan, and then they were localized in North America.
Okay.
But they used the voice cast from Beast Wars. So like the guy who was Optimus Primal was cast as Optimus Prime.
Okay.
So it was very easy for me at that point to like just attach onto this new Transformers show with the because it had a lot of the same actors, and it's referred to in the universe as like the Unicron trilogy because Unicron plays a big role in that. And I have a cousin who is very much a Generation 1 Transformers fan, so he grew up with the show in the 80s, had a lot of the toys, and he's kind of followed the franchise ever since, even now still having some of the stuff. And it was through him I was introduced to a series called Transformers Animated that aired for a few years between like 2007 and 2009 that was kind of a throwback to the original series, but at the same time being its own thing and incorporating elements from the movies. And So I'll have to say I've followed Transformers a lot over the years. I don't think aside from Beast Wars, I don't think I've followed an entire show from beginning to end. Like most of them I've like checked out the first couple episodes and then moved along. So I'd certainly heard of Transformers Rescue Bots before. I knew it was a thing, and I kind of obviously read it off. I obviously wrote it off because I could tell just from looking at it that it was targeted at a much younger, even beyond like the normal Transformers audience. It was clearly targeted at a younger audience.
Younger, yeah.
So I looked it up in Wikipedia once, I remember, and being intrigued by it because I recognized some of the voice actors that were in the show, and I'm like, oh, what is this about? And I like these voice actors, so I think I remember being at my parents' cottage and flipping channels on TV and seeing that it was on. So I like flipped to the channel and watched it for about 3 minutes to, oh yeah, that's voice actor and that's that voice actor and that's okay, that's cool. Good to see that they're here. And then flipped it away because that was all I needed to check was if it was actually all those actors in the show. So before this was pulled out of The Bachelor last week, I had never sat down and watched an entire episode of Rescue Bots. I can think I've finished 4 of them now.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. I think it's been 4.
So this is it. We're going to be talking about Transformers Rescue Bots. And as we talk about this, it's with the full knowledge understanding that of all the Transformers properties that I've ever seen, this is definitely the one that is targeted at the youngest age demographic. I would say kids as young as 4 or 5.
Yeah. Probably not too much older than 8 or 10. I think they would already be transitioning into the more violent Transformers.
Yeah, like one of the things I immediately noticed with this show is that the Decepticons are not present.
At least not in the first series, first season.
Right, and based on the articles I've read, it says that at most they're referenced once in a while.
Yeah,
but they're never present. So immediately there's no real antagonist. There's no bad guy.
Yeah.
I guess later on in the show they do introduce like a evil business person who is like, looking to do whatever certain things in the city, but in terms of action, none of the action you see in the show is like between robots fighting each other. And there's no blasters and swords and a lot of things you'd see in Transformers shows. It's more so action as if you're in a one of those movies. What do they call those disaster movies? Like ones where there's lots of dangerous things happening and people are being rescued from stuff.
Yeah.
Does it surprise you at all that Rescue Bots began as a toy series, a toy line?
Actually, a little bit. I always assumed things would start the other way around, especially with... Yeah, it surprises me a little, but given that Transformers has such a reputation and a history at this point already, and that it's a franchise that's been so bound up with toy sales, that makes sense to me that they would make a line of toys for younger children and then transform it into a show.
Transform it. Good one.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the original Transformers series in the 80s was based on the toy line. So the toys came first with Transformers. Okay. Even there's a Netflix series called The Toys That Made Us that I recommend to our listeners. Yeah, they really basically go into the history of toy companies and explain like their ups and downs.
Yeah.
And with Transformers, they explain that they basically found these Japanese, like the Hasbro people were at a toy fair somewhere, and they found these Japanese toys that were vehicles that turned into robots. And they brought it back to the States, and they kind of came up with a storyline of good and bad characters. And once they'd kind of gotten all that figured out, then they created the show to help boost the toy sales.
Okay.
So Rescue Bots being a toy line first and then a show, it falls right in line with the Transformers history, if you will.
Didn't know that.
They also had a line of storybooks that preceded the...
Okay, that makes sense too.
...the TV series for Rescue Bots, and it paints a different narrative. Like the story structure is kind of similar, except there's lots of changes they made for when they did end up making a TV series. So we'll get into that a little bit because I think the changes they made are interesting. But just in general, we're going to be talking about the TV series and not the toy line because we don't have any of the toys to check, and we're not talking about the book series. So in terms of the narrative, we're going to be focusing on the narrative that's spelled out in the TV series, not the books. all that to say, this series seemed to be very successful because it ran for 108 episodes.
Wow.
And it still continues because there's a spin-off series called Rescue Bots Rescue Bot Academy. So even though the main series about Rescue Bots has ended, it now has a sequel series where the Rescue Bots, who are the main characters in the first show, are teachers at a
the
school.
next generation of Transformers?
The next generation of Rescue Bots, yes.
Okay.
So I was surprised to learn that basically the run of 108 episodes makes it the longest running Transformers series ever.
Really? How long was the first series?
So apparently the generation 1. So I guess I should explain this. I'm talking in terms of generations because that's how Hasbro talks about their brands, but
okay.
The first generation of Transformers is basically the toy line and the shows from the 80s. That's basically what so when I say G1, I'm referring to generation 1, which is referring to the 80s Transformers. Right. So that show went on for 98 episodes.
Okay, pretty close. 10 episodes off. That's but
considering that there's basically been a Transformers show on TV nonstop since the mid 80s, I think it's impressive that this is the one that has the longest run.
Yeah,
and it probably speaks to the demand for essentially a Transformers series that skews younger.
Yeah.
So good on you, and then technically it's still going on because the spinoff is happening now. So good on you, Rescue Bots, for having such longevity.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, my initial kind of draw into the series was the voice cast.
Right.
So the voice actors who are on this show are familiar to me because of their work on other projects. So for one thing, this kind of gets into some of who the characters are, but there's a police chief in the show who's voiced by Maurice LaMarche, who I know as a Canadian voice actor who grew up in Toronto.
Okay.
And he's famous. I think he's probably most famous for playing the Brain from Pinky and the Brain.
Yeah.
If I get that's more of, I guess, if you're a 90s kid, you'd know who he was.
Definitely.
And so, and he's done a lot of jobs on Futurama too.
Okay.
He's pretty much a bunch of the ancillary characters on Futurama.
Yeah.
So if you've ever watched Futurama, you've heard Maurice LaMarche tons of times.
Yeah.
Jason Marsden plays a firefighter. He was introduced to me as Max Goof in the Goofy movie.
Huh.
And he's been...
Never saw that.
You never saw the Goofy movie?
Nope.
Oh, I'm going to sit you down and make you watch that. But he's been in a bunch of other stuff as well. And then we have a scientist who's played by LeVar Burton, who you know from Star Trek. Is that
That's
right?
Right, yeah. When you said the name earlier today when we were watching the episode, it rang a bell. I didn't place it immediately, but by the time you said it, I'd already realized that it was one of the Star Trek characters.
So when you watched the show and he was in it, his voice didn't jump out. He's like, that's Geordie LaForge.
I don't tend to have the same attention to voices that you seem to.
Oh. The female pilot on the show is voiced by Lacey Chabert. I know her best from being the voice of Gwen Stacy from The Spectacular Spider-Man, but movie people would probably know her best as one of the Mean Girls. She was the one that was really... No, she wasn't the dumb one that was really dumb. She was the brunette. I haven't seen the movie in so long.
Yeah.
I just know that she was one of the Mean Girls.
Okay. Interesting.
And then one of the Autobots in the show, Heatwave, is voiced by Steve Bloom, who I know as Spike from Cowboy Bebop and Wolverine from certain X-Men series.
Okay.
And he's played the Green Goblin, and he's been in Star Wars shows. He's kind of done all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So it was just neat to see him there as well. So for anyone who's a big voice acting person, there's a lot of cool voice actors, and they're all people that I don't usually see together.
And then you named one big actor who's not just known as a voice actor, who appears in later episodes that unfortunately aren't on Netflix.
Yes, Mark Hamill was in the show at a certain point as the younger brother of the police chief. And then, even famously for me, they get Peter Cullen to play Optimus Prime, who, for those who don't know, Peter Cullen is the voice of Optimus Prime. He originated the role in the 80s.
Okay, wow.
And he's been in all the live action movies. He's been in a lot of the more recent series, reprising the role.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't seem to me like a voice that will be difficult to imitate, or I just combined two words there, emulate or imitate. But at the same time, it did sound authentic. It did sound like
he
the
is the
Optimus
best
Prime.
at sounding like this.
Yeah, a little better, I would say.
Well, he's the one getting paid to do it, not
Yeah.
me. But I'll just say that's my gushing about voice actors. So let me just say, I was able to enjoy this show more than I probably would have, because I've noticed that generally kids, like kid shows, get like, I don't want to say they're bad actors, but they don't get like named voice actors that I recognize.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty in the know as like who's big in the voice acting world, but generally like they seem to like farm out the acting for these kid shows to like studios that are in not major centers, and so that the talent is non-famous people and non-famous to me. So like the fact that this show actually has quality performances in it that I'm familiar with is like that's top notch, and certainly made watching the show much more easier. But
either or.
This show premiered on a channel called The Hub back in 2011. Have you ever heard of The Hub before?
Again, only because you mentioned it. Before you had, I'd never heard of it.
Okay, so what do you remember about me saying about The Hub?
I think you said it was a joint venture between Discovery Channel and some sort of cartoon station, if I remember.
Hasbro.
Okay, toy company. Right.
That's right. So this was an initiative between the Discovery Channel and Hasbro to basically create an avenue for children's programming wherein there were meant to be lessons and kids were learning things through the shows.
Huh.
So this is where like My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic came from.
Okay.
It premiered on this channel, and it continues to be a show where there's a lesson to be learned about friendship. And this show premiered as a the Wikipedia page for the series says that it teaches kids about safety and hazards. Yeah. You kind of like raised your eyebrows at that.
I didn't really agree with that take on it from the few episodes I've seen. Perhaps later it gets more explicit into exactly what children should be doing to stay safe, but most of these tend to be natural disasters. I don't think children are going to be encountering forest fires or landslides on a daily basis, hopefully, and I don't think this proposed solutions are very helpful either. Most children, as far as I know, don't have giant robots that can come to their rescue. I would have taken the approach more that it teaches about different social qualities or characteristics that are beneficial, like teamwork or...
Well, it's interesting because like My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, which had a very clear setup in its premise as to how it teaches a lesson to people, because in that series the main character has to basically report back to their boss about friendship lessons they learn.
Interesting.
So at the end of each episode she's writing a letter explaining what she learned that week. So it's pretty on the nose initially.
Yeah.
But in this show, I mean, we're getting into the plot now of this series, so we're kind of getting a bit of the setup for this show, which if you listen to the theme song, it kind of it's like you could listen to the theme song and understand the whole plot of the series.
A routine patrol with 4 bots and stasis. Years later, awoke in the strangest of places. Earth was their home now, and in addition, Optimus Prime gave them this mission: learn from the humans, serve and protect, live in their world, earn their respect. Family of heroes will be your allies to others remain robots in disguise. Rescue bots, go to the rescue. Humans in need, heroes indeed. Rescue bots, go to the rescue. With Cody to guide them and show them the way. Rescue bots will be safe in the day. Rescue bots, to the rescue. Rescue bots.
Because basically it establishes that 4 Autobots who have been in stasis all this time wake up, arrive on Earth, and they find out that Cybertron's been destroyed. They've kind of missed out on everything that's happened in the Transformers universe up until that time. And before they were in stasis, they were rescue bots, and apparently on Cybertron there were there were many different teams of Transformers that were rescue bots. So like their whole kind of modus operandi was to be emergency services, I suppose, in rescuing people. So they weren't necessarily involved in combat, which is kind of a thing with Cybertronians because there's always seems to be a war going on. So in the series premiere, Optimus Prime meets them and explains to them, he's like, okay, I acknowledge that you guys are rescue bots, so I'm going to give you this special assignment. He basically tells them, live with these human beings and help them protect this town. And learn from them, learn about the human race, about their customs, about their culture, about their people.
Yeah.
And so it's almost as if he's commissioning them to go off and do this almost espionage, but
Yeah.
really it becomes a jumping on point for the writers to teach not just the rescue bots, but the audience lessons about humanity and friendship and teamwork and how to be part of a team.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm pretty sure I have not watched a full episode of Paw Patrol, but just hearing friends who are parents talk about it and seeing the toys, my first impression was that it was the Transformers answer or alternative to Paw Patrol. Maybe you know more about the show and you can.
Oh yes, I've become very familiar with
the
the Paw Patrol universe.
Yeah.
And I would agree that's an excellent comparison. Even before that, when I was growing up, my youngest brother, who goes on by the mantle King Boo on the podcast, he was really into this franchise called Rescue Heroes.
Okay.
And that was a series of toys where basically all of the main characters were emergency service personnel. So you had people who were lifeguards or, like a Coast Guard, firefighters, police officers, people that were involved in like helicopter pilots, like, basically all the different toys you could get were people who had some kind of role involved in rescuing people. And then they had vehicles that went along with that. And you could buy like command centers and all this stuff. Like my brother had this like literally like this aircraft carrier that was like, I want to say it was at least 12 feet long that you could land all the vehicles on and whatnot. And so I can totally see that both Paw Patrol and Rescue Bots are essentially successors to that.
Yeah.
Because yes, all the characters are themed around a different type of emergency service vehicle.
Yeah.
So you can have one that's clearly colored red to be the firefighter, and one that's colored blue to be the police car, and one that's construction themed, and one that's aerial and whatnot.
And Paw Patrol, if I am remembering correctly, has a human element as well as the animal element in it.
Yeah, so there's like one human who basically leads the whole Paw Patrol.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's probably one major difference between, if we're going to compare Paw Patrol to Rescue Bots, is that in Paw Patrol there's one human commanding a bunch of dogs that have emergency service vehicles. In this, it's a team of humans who are partnered with Transformers.
Which is more similar to the show your brother watched?
I don't know if Rescue Heroes was ever actually a show, to be honest, but it certainly was toys.
Oh, okay.
Where there were, human characters that had vehicles.
Okay.
So in that series, the vehicles were not sentient.
Right.
In the toy line, they were just vehicles. So I when I sat down and watched the first episode, I'm like, okay, this is a very interesting setup for... It kind of explains why the series does not involve any conflict with the Decepticons, because Optimus Prime has basically chosen to give these guys this special assignment. And I thought the way that the writers kind of wrote that in, it made sense, was interesting. And what I was also surprised to find out is that Rescue Bots is actually set in the same continuity as another Transformers show that was going on at the same time called Transformers Prime, which I'm assuming you have never seen before.
No.
Good. Because I bring it up mainly just to illustrate that there are subtle ways in which Rescue Bots makes references to Transformers Prime. I have seen a bunch of it. I have not finished it because, as I've already mentioned, I don't seem to finish Transformers series. I started and then I stop.
Yeah. But
Transformers Prime, it went on for a number of years just like Rescue Bots, but then it concluded before Rescue Bots, and then it got a sequel called Robots in Disguise. That is not the Robots in Disguise I watched in 2001, but a different series called Transformers Robots in Disguise.
Right.
Does that make any sense?
Given that television shows are continuously rebooting, yes.
So all that to say, the characters in Rescue Bots are referenced occasionally on Transformers Prime.
Okay.
And the Optimus Prime and the Bumblebee you see in Rescue Bots, they make kind of a cameo appearances here and there. So it's certainly not as poor a spinoff as other shows I've seen.
Yeah.
There was a short-lived Crypto the Superdog TV series.
Okay.
And then it's all based on the comics. Like Superman has a dog, basically.
Oh, okay.
Who has the same powers as Superman.
Interesting.
And in that series, Superman shows up at the end of the first episode just to kind of commission him and then disappears and you never see him again. So it's a very loose, weak spinoff. But this, Optimus Prime has been in at least 3 of the episodes.
Yeah, 3 out of
mostly,
4.
Mostly he's on a screen talking to them, but at least he's there.
Yeah.
And
is he on Earth at this point?
yeah, so the idea is that Transformers Prime, it's the war between the Autobots and the Decepticons, and in that series, there's 3 humans that work with the Autobots. There's like 3 teenagers basically,
Okay.
and kind of like in this show, there's like certain Autobots are paired up with certain humans because there's personality quirks that each of them have that they can like learn from being kind of put together as partners. And so in the pilot of this show, when Optimus is telling them what to do, they're like, well, why should we listen to humans? And he's like, I've found that like the people of this earth are very resourceful, especially the young. And if you're the parent sitting there watching Rescue Bots with your kids and you're familiar with Transformers Prime, you're like, that makes total sense because he's had all these experiences with the humans and the children in the other show. So as somebody who has had that exposure, I was very impressed. Like, this is certainly a lot more effort than I would say a show like this that's designed for little kids deserves to have put into it.
Yeah. Most parents probably aren't going to be paying that much attention to this show or be simultaneously watching the more tween version of this universe.
Well, I'll give credit to the developers of the series, and when you look at their resumes, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
There's 3 people who are credited with developing Rescue Bots. One of them, his name is Jeff Kline, and he's basically worked on all the Transformers series in the last 10 years. So, but before that, he's worked on a lot of shows. Actually, he's had a pretty busy, I would say, filmography. He's basically been working since the mid-90s on more so action series.
Okay.
A lot of stuff like Max Steel, Godzilla the series, Jackie Chan Adventures. A particular favorite of mine that he worked on was a show called Extreme Ghostbusters, which was a sequel to the original series wherein 4 college students take on the mantle from their Egon students because he's a teacher now.
Okay.
It was a really good show, and I wish they'd made that no movie instead of the ones they've made.
Yeah. Off
topic. Point is, Jeff has done a lot of work on Transformers and action series.
Yeah.
And then a man named Brian Hohlfeld. Sorry, Brian Hohlfeld. His filmography seems to be more so directed towards like little children programming, if you will.
Okay.
A lot of Winnie the Pooh stuff I see on here. He's done work on Sesame Street, and really it seems like Rescue Bots is his main contribution to the Transformers universe.
Yeah.
So you've got the guy who's done a lot of action shows, the guy who's done Winnie the Pooh, a whole lot of Winnie the Pooh. And then the third developer, her name is Nicole Dubuc. Dubuc. How would you pronounce the name Dubuc?
Dubuc?
Dubuc? Okay.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before.
Nicole Dubuc's been a writer on a lot of TV shows, and they're all a lot of TV shows that I like. I'm just going to name a bunch here. We have Jackie Chan Adventures, Kim Possible, My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, Star Wars Rebels, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2012, Transformers Prime, Young Justice, which is one of my favorite shows, and Rescue Bots. So you see these 3 different people working on this series and developing it. You got somebody who's a lot of action, a lot of little children's, and then like a mix of both.
Yeah.
And Nicole, like the shows that Nicole's worked on especially, are shows that are designed for children, but they have clever writing that are entertaining for adults as well.
Yeah.
Like if you're forced to sit down and watch the show with your kid, there's stuff in it that you can get from it, not just rotting your brain out watching children's programming.
Yeah, I will admit watching this was entertaining enough that, especially if I was watching it with a younger child, it wouldn't be nearly as painful as, say, watching Teletubbies, which is another
that's
show
just the worst
aimed at this audience, which, reflecting on it today, I think just in preparation for this, I think has its own merits in that it is maybe even for a younger audience and caters to children's need to explore the same thing repeatedly. But as an adult, to see the same clip of children playing 3 times in a row is just torture. But to a child, maybe that's exactly developmentally what they need. I really don't know. But in any case, whether it's because it's for an older audience or not, it wasn't painful to watch. I can't say I was totally caught up in what was going to happen in the next episode or anything, but it was mildly enjoyable.
Yeah, the storytelling is very episodic.
Yeah.
And the leaps in logic are kind of not all there. Like it's certainly it's not the most amazing writing ever in television, but it's, in my opinion, way better than things like Paw Patrol.
Yeah. Well, it's a difficult balance to strike, and in that sense, I don't know if it's as successful. And it sounds like, based on my limited knowledge of both and their popularity, I think Paw Patrol is much more successful with children. I've heard it described by several parents as the scourge of parents or something to that effect, because their children get so obsessed with it and so engaged in it. This show, I think, is trying to strike a pretty difficult balance in that they're trying to keep adults entertained or engaged, at least to some extent, but then also writing for a very young audience. That's a big gap to bridge.
Yeah, and I guess the fact that it's still going on speaks to its popularity. And I don't know what the toy sales are like,
right?
But I would agree with you. In my exposure to young families, I've certainly seen a lot more Paw Patrol merchandise than Rescue Bots merchandise. And who knows? Maybe Hasbro just isn't putting out more, Rescue Bots merchandise. I don't know what the story is there.
Does Hasbro do Paw Patrol, by the way?
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure a company called Spin Master is the mastermind behind Paw Patrol. Huh. But all that to say, it's better than I thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. And again, the trope I've seen in a lot of Transformers series is pairing each of the Autobots with a human character that is different in personality to them, so that both characters can kind of learn and grow. And once you get into the episodic story after story, you can focus on different characters and their dynamic with each other.
And I feel like a lot of that would be lost on such a young audience, but maybe intuitively or subconsciously it would resonate with them, just in that even if they can't vocalize it yet, they would be aware that people are just very different in their class or in the world or wherever they're encountering people. I don't know if they could put their finger on what it is exactly, the dynamics that are going on, but
it's pretty on the nose. Like the fire truck Transformer, Heatwave, and his partner, who's a firefighter, are both hotheads.
Right.
And and they're both like stubborn. They both think they're the best, and they obviously clash with each other. You have the Transformer who can fly, Blades, who is afraid of heights, and is kind of a fraidy cat, whereas his partner, Danny, she's a thrill junkie. She loves going into danger, and they're obviously polar opposites in that respect.
Yeah.
So it's not as subtle as other Transformers series, but obviously it's not meant to be. It's meant for a younger audience.
Right. And I just think even there, I think it would still be pretty subtle for as young an audience as 4 or 5. Parents would pick up on those dynamics. Children might just go along with any old dynamic you throw at them, but again, I'm no child psychologist. I'm not a parent, so I really can't say. But anyway, it works.
In the books that are based in Rescue Bots, each person has a partner, but they're all like unrelated. And when you get to the TV series, all of the partners of the Rescue Bots are part of the same family.
Yeah.
So it's like this family where like the dad's a police officer and he's like the chief of the town, and then the 2 sons, one's an engineer who's like an expert in construction and building things. The other is she's an ace pilot, and then they have a youngest sibling who's like a kid.
Yeah.
And they're all involved in this Rescue Bots operation.
Yeah.
And when I mentioned that to you, you were kind of raising your eyebrows.
Yeah, I think that structure was, to me, it seems clearly aimed at the children. As a way of simplifying the dynamics, at least to some extent. I think to most adults, to me certainly, that seems a little unlikely or unrealistic. Even if one family somehow had all these rescue service officers in the family, the idea that they would be chosen exclusively for all of these highly technological missions, or to be given this great privilege of having this cutting-edge Earth technology, as the town is led to believe, that doesn't really seem to be realistic, but that would totally go over a child's head, I'm sure. And so it would simplify their relationship, I think, if they're all together all the time and they're just brother, sister.
Yeah, and I guess it does kind of like allow them to tell more stories about families.
Yeah. Like
how the siblings how they interact with each other.
Yeah, that's true.
At this point, I haven't met the mom. I don't know if the mom has passed away or whatever. Maybe she shows up later in the series, but at least in the beginning, she's not there.
Yeah, there's no mention from what I saw.
Yeah, so wherever the mom is of this family, it's
Yeah.
hopefully she's okay. But yeah, I kind of see what you're saying there, the idea of simplifying the story just by making them all in a family.
Yeah.
And in real life, you are an educator, so I'm just curious,
Right.
like from what you've seen, does this show do a good job of, speaking to a child audience?
I don't know. Like I said, I think it's a difficult bridge to gap. It's one thing for a show like Animaniacs, which I grew up with in the 90s, to include references for adults and yet be zany enough for older children. But for an audience this young, to keep parents engaged too, not to say that it can't be done. I think the show makes a good effort and is somewhat successful.
There's Back to the Future
But-
references.
Yeah, that's true. Back to the Future ripoffs, pretty blatant ripoffs.
Yeah, they have they have Doc Green instead of Doc Brown,
And his car immediately looks like the DeLorean.
Oh, yeah.
There's no question about that.
which I loved. I
Yeah.
laughed.
That was funny. Yeah, I think. Sorry, repeat the question.
Well, I guess what I'm really trying to get is, like, would you ever bring this show into your classroom as like an education tool?
Yeah, as for its educational value, I would say it's pretty minimal. Again, they're not really educating about the types of disasters they're coming across, so it's not. It doesn't at this point, from what we've seen, doesn't have any scientific value to it. Really, it's not really looking to emulate reality or the laws of physics or anything like that, or teach about the weather phenomenon, for example, the storm they're encountering, or the way things work under the ocean when Bumblebee was trying to drive up a cliff, as you pointed out. So from a subject content perspective, I would say it's pretty minimal, if not non-existent. From a social point of view, as far as the cartoons go, I think it does all right. Like, it's certainly a wholesome show. As you said, there's no
Antagonists.
Yeah, there's no antagonists. There's no warfare that goes on or any sort of violence in that sense. The humans that are breaking the law or whatever, it's not in any sort of real violent way. There was one guy who was given a speeding ticket and tried to evade the cops, but he gets caught from one of the rescue bots. So pretty mild stuff. And they do touch on social dynamics and issues, like you said, of friendship and teamwork. Again, I don't know how much children of that age are going to pick up on that. It's not done in a way that's totally relatable as it would be, say, on a show like Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers, where they're children and they're doing very childlike things. They're kind of having to imagine themselves in this really grown-up world, in a sense, simplified grown-up world. So how much they can put themselves in the shoes of those characters, I don't really know. But it certainly isn't, from what I can see, teaching any really bad lessons. Like, you do have the hothead fireman and his similarly hot-headed rescue bot. So maybe children could pick and choose kind of the wrong messaging there by accident. But
I'm
overall,
sure there must be episodes that help humble them.
Right, and some of the episodes we watched already show that. I don't know if the messages are clear enough for children of that age. Again, I don't really have a lot of experience with children that age. The children I've taught for most of my career are more in the 10 to 12 range. But yeah, it would be hard to find a lot of fault with the actual content of the show unless you're looking for kind of realism, but then you really shouldn't be watching a Transformers show and expecting that in terms of physics and science and all of that. But I think it would still score pretty low on the educational meter overall. I think as far as entertainment goes, it's not a bad choice. There's certainly a lot worse choices out there. But it does follow the modern trend of being very fast-paced. So it's certainly not, if you're a parent who's concerned about developing your child's attention span, I don't think it does much to help with that. It certainly follows a modern pace where action scenes are close on the heels of each other. They follow, one action scene follows another with very little in-between time. It's pretty fast-paced. But as a cartoon goes, it's relatively. It's just about completely wholesome, I guess.
Yeah, for me, I've always made a distinction between cartoons and an animated series. Like in my mind, there actually is a distinction there.
Yeah, this is a cartoon. I don't even know for sure what your distinction is, but it is a cartoon.
Yeah, so but it's certainly it's closer to being an animated series than it is to being like Teletubbies. Because there is like some level of complexity, and they are making an effort to connect it to the wider Transformers, and in particular that continuity of the Transformers, and to even like even throwing in Back to the Future Easter eggs. Like that's a level of complexity that, again, Paw Patrol does not have.
Right.
So I'm happy this kind of show exists because it is definitely like a gateway drug for maybe calling it but what I'm trying to say is it's an entry point for children who are, in that age range, who are obviously you can't start watching Transformers because it's quite literally about war. You can't watch that at a young age, but Rescue Bots is a great kind of transition entry point where you can introduce them to the concept of Transformers, robots that are in disguise as vehicles, and get to know some of the characters, and then they can kind of graduate up to the more serious Transformers shows as time goes on.
And depending on where you stand as a parent on exposing even older children to that, maybe the drug analogy isn't such a
poor connection.
Yeah, it's not such a poor comparison after all, depending on like I said, depending on where you stand on that.
War's good. I grew up watching, in Canada, we've talked about this before, but just to complain about it again, in Canada, where Beast Wars was produced, it aired on television as Beasties because the Canadian broadcasting people didn't want shows for children with war in the title.
Huh.
Yeah, it was very lame.
Okay.
But anyway, all that to say, Transformers Rescue Bots was better than I expected. I expected it to be a real slog because I know it's intended for a younger audience. But I enjoyed it. It's certainly not something I would keep up with because, again, I'm not the target audience.
Yeah.
But I'm happy that shows like this exist, wherein children can get introduced to, essentially nerd culture. Because that's basically what this is. Yeah. It's a vehicle to introduce young children to nerd culture and get them interested in the franchise so that when they get older, if they so are allowed, / if they so choose, they can invest in the other areas of it and they can learn the history and all that fun stuff.
So you'd say it's a transformative vehicle then?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Very good. And, I'm happy there's shows like this around. Like there's a series that's starting now called DC Superhero Girls.
Okay.
And it's meant to introduce you to all the female superheroes, and it's a show meant for little girls.
Yeah.
Probably boys too, but at least it gets them interested in these characters so that they can, go into the other stuff later.
Yeah.
But what would you say your final thoughts are on Rescue Bots?
Final thoughts? I would say if you're a parent of a young child and that child has shown an interest in vehicles, mechanized things of any sort, or rescue services, or if you're a parent who, for some reason, wants to expose your child to that sort of thing or think that they might be interested in that, then this is a pretty wholesome option for you. But if you're looking for it to deliver much more than that in terms of the educational content or even the moral content, even though there is some content there that it doesn't deliver too high on that, but overall, I'd say it's a wholesome cartoon based on the Transformers / rescue services world.
There you go. So if this conversation has gotten you interested in checking out Transformers Rescue Bots, the first season, which is 25 episodes or 26 episodes, is available on Netflix in Canada. Again, I can't speak to other regions, but there are 108 episodes worth of content. So if you get invested in this franchise, there's lots of room to grow. And like I said, the spin-off series is just starting in 2018, so it's probably got some episodes at this point. So it's time to go into the bat jar and look at our mail. At least this is what I would normally say, but we don't have any mail this week. But, I think, Professor F, we have to remind the people about how to get a hold of us because I want to do more episodes like Rescue Bots where I'm reviewing and talking about things I've never seen before.
Yeah. Okay, so according to this sheet of paper, it says, if you want to contact the show with a question or an idea for an episode, you can send an email to
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
We are available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts.
That's including YouTube, by the way.
And I personally get it just off the website when I do listen to it. Share our podcast on Facebook and make sure to like our page because we want everyone to join us
inside the Bat Jar.
You know, Peter Cullen's going to die eventually. I might as well get ready to replace him, right?
Keep working on it.
I'm trying here. But yeah, please let us know what you want us to cover because we're happy to talk about anything that kind of broadly falls into the lens of nerd culture.
So let me get this straight, though, because I'm not so familiar with the show to understand all the inner workings of the Bat Jar itself. I saw lots of slips in there, but you can only go in when you receive a new piece of mail?
No. We pull at the end of each episode. We pull something out.
Oh, so we are going to pull something.
Yeah, we're gonna do that right now, actually.
Right.
So open up the jar,
Okay.
and you're gonna basically pull out a piece of paper, and that'll be what we talk about next time.
All right.
Okay, he's got one.
So on this piece of paper is written Disney princesses.
What? Disney princesses. I guess it's there. Oh my
It's
goodness.
there.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting.
Was this the Mama Poppins or a Dee Dee?
No,
Contribution,
that's
perhaps?
my handwriting, so
Oh.
I must have written it there myself.
No, I mean emailed in.
I don't remember either of them writing in about it, but yeah, keep it out because we don't want to
Yeah.
cover the same topic twice. Wow, cool. Well,
Okay.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. I guess I should thank you, Professor F, for coming in and
Yeah,
helping out
it's
with
fun.
the podcast this week. And in the future, I think you said Babylon 5 is your favorite.
Yeah, one of my favorite sci-fi shows for sure. I would gladly come in for that.
So if you guys want to hear us talk about Babylon 5, I think it's in the Batcher already. But
Oh.
basically, if you send more emails,
Yeah,
that means that
higher chances.
more.
I suppose I could always send one in myself.
You could, yeah.
Okay.
One person I work with jokingly says they're going to send in 50 emails recommending George of the Jungle. So
is that even in the nerd culture?
well, it's in
realm?
Disney, and it's
Okay.
an adaptation of
It's
an
a
older
movie.
TV series, so it
Okay.
there's enough connective tissue to make it work.
Yeah.
So yeah, guys, send us emails, subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you like to use, and give us a rating and write a review because that helps advance us in the polls, if you will. But come back to the Batjar podcast next week when we talk about Disney princesses. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
And I'm Professor F.
Catch you on the flip side.
À bientôt.